There's a moment in every judge's career when someone tries to remind you who they think you answer to. Usually it's subtle, a phone call from a political contact, a suggestion that certain cases deserve special consideration, a reminder about budget allocations or judicial appointments. But sometimes someone walks into your courtroom and tells you directly who they think owns you. This happened on a Thursday morning in March, during what should have been a routine municipal violation case. Mayor Vincent DeStefano was cited for multiple parking violations in handicapped spaces outside restaurants where he'd been dining. Not once, not twice, but 7 times over 6 months. Always at upscale establishments, always during lunch meetings with political donors and business contacts. Now, parking violations might seem minor, but when you're talking about a sitting mayor repeatedly parking in spaces reserved for disabled citizens, it becomes a question of character and respect for the laws he's sworn to uphold. Mayor DeStefano wasn't just any politician facing citations. He'd been mayor of Cranston for 8 years, building a reputation as a tough, business-friendly administrator who'd brought economic development to the city. He was also someone who'd made it very clear that he considered municipal court part of his administrative apparatus rather than an independent branch of government. The morning he appeared in my courtroom, DeStefano walked in like he was arriving at a staff meeting he was running, rather than a judicial proceeding where he was the defendant. He wore an expensive navy suit, his mayor's pin prominently displayed on his lapel, and the confident bearing of someone who'd never seriously been held accountable for anything. Behind him walked his chief of staff, his communications director, and his personal attorney, a small entourage that made it clear this wasn't just about parking tickets. "Good morning, Mayor DeStefano," I said as he approached the defendant's table. "You're cited for 7 violations of municipal parking ordinances. How do you plead?" DeStefano looked at me with the expression of someone who couldn't believe he was being subjected to this inconvenience. "Your Honor, I think we can resolve this matter quickly and efficiently." "I'm listening." "Judge Caprio, these citations involve situations where I was conducting official city business, emergency meetings, urgent discussions with business leaders, time-sensitive negotiations that couldn't be delayed by searching for regular parking spaces, emergency meetings at 4-star restaurants, urgent discussions during 2-hour lunches, time-sensitive negotiations that required parking in handicapped spaces." Mayor DeStefano, were any of these meetings actual emergencies that justified violating parking laws? "Judge, when you're mayor, every meeting is potentially an emergency. Economic development doesn't follow a schedule." "Mayor, were you responding to fires, accidents, or public safety emergencies?" "Judge, I was responding to opportunities to bring jobs and investment to our city. That's my job." His job. He was claiming that being mayor gave him the right to violate laws designed to protect disabled citizens. "Mayor DeStefano, these parking spaces are specifically reserved for people with mobility challenges. Do you understand the purpose of handicapped parking laws?" "Of course I understand, Your Honor, but I also understand that sometimes..."
Pause right here, because this is where ego collides with the Constitution. When someone walks into a courtroom believing power flows downward instead of upward, you're about to witness a dangerous misunderstanding of democracy.
Sometimes public officials have to make practical decisions about how to serve the broader community efficiently. Practical decisions, serving the broader community. He was arguing that his convenience was more important than disabled citizens' access to businesses. "Mayor, on March 3rd, you parked in a handicapped space outside Ristorante Italiano during a lunch meeting with construction contractors. How does that serve the broader community? Judge, that meeting resulted in a $12 million downtown development project that will create 300 jobs. And you couldn't have walked from a legal parking space to attend that meeting. DeStefano's expression hardened. Your Honor, I think you're missing the bigger picture here. What bigger picture? The picture of how municipal government actually operates, the practical realities of leadership that require flexibility and understanding. He was lecturing me about how municipal government works, apparently forgetting that municipal court is part of municipal government, and that I've been serving longer than he'd been mayor. Mayor DeStefano, I understand how municipal government operates. What I don't understand is why you think being mayor exempts you from parking laws. Judge, I'm not asking for exemption. I'm asking for context. When the mayor of the city needs to conduct urgent business, reasonable people understand that rigid enforcement of minor regulations can interfere with serving the public interest. Rigid enforcement of minor regulations. He was characterizing handicapped parking laws as bureaucratic red tape rather than civil rights protections. Mayor, do you consider handicapped parking laws to be minor regulations? Judge, I consider them important protections that serve a vital purpose. I also consider economic development meetings that create jobs and generate tax revenue to be important public service. And when those two priorities conflict? When they conflict, practical leaders make practical decisions based on the greater good. The greater good. DeStefano was arguing that his personal convenience served a higher purpose than disability rights. Mayor DeStefano, who determines what constitutes the greater good? Judge, the voters determine that when they elect mayors to make difficult decisions about priorities and resource allocation. And did the voters elect you to violate handicap parking laws? DeStefano was getting visibly frustrated with my questions. Judge, the voters elected me to bring economic development and job creation to this city. If that sometimes requires flexibility about where I park my car during urgent business meetings, most reasonable people understand that. Most reasonable people. He was implying that anyone who objected to his parking violations was being unreasonable. Mayor, let me read you something from one of the citations. March 15th, 1:30 p.m. You parked in a handicap space outside Bella Vista Restaurant. The citing officer noted that an elderly woman with a walker had to park 3 blocks away because the handicap space was occupied by your vehicle. DeStefano shifted uncomfortably. Judge, I wasn't aware of that specific situation. But you were aware that you were parking in a space reserved for people who need close access to businesses. Judge, I was aware that I needed to attend an urgent meeting about the waterfront development project. Mayor, how long was this urgent meeting? I'm not sure of the exact timing. I looked at the citation record. According to the officer, your vehicle was parked there for 2 hours and 20 minutes. DeStefano's attorney tried to jump in. Your Honor, the length of the meeting doesn't affect the urgency that necessitated the parking decision. Counselor, a 2-hour...
This isn't about parking tickets anymore, this is about who answers to whom. And trust me, the law has a very specific answer. Here's the legal reality most people miss. Handicapped parking laws aren't traffic rules, they're civil rights protections. They exist so people with disabilities can participate in everyday life with dignity.
Or lunch doesn't sound like an emergency to me. That's when Mayor DeStefano made the mistake that would define the rest of the hearing. He looked at me with obvious irritation and said, Judge Caprio, I think you need to remember something important here. You work for the city government. The city government works for me. That means, essentially, you work for me. You work for me. The courtroom went completely silent. DeStefano had just told the sitting judge that judicial decisions should defer to mayoral authority because judges are city employees who report to the mayor. Mayor DeStefano, could you repeat what you just said? Judge, I said that municipal court is part of city government. City government reports to the mayor, and you should consider that relationship when making decisions about city business. Mayor, are you telling me that I should rule in your favor because you're my boss? I'm telling you that reasonable municipal judges understand the practical realities of how city government functions. And what are those practical realities? The practical reality is that mayors are elected by the people to run city operations efficiently. Municipal judges are appointed to handle routine legal matters in ways that support effective city administration. DeStefano was describing municipal judges as administrative functionaries whose job was to rubber stamp mayoral preferences, rather than independent judicial officers who apply law equally to everyone. Mayor DeStefano, do you believe that municipal judges should rule differently in cases involving mayors than in cases involving ordinary citizens? I believe that municipal judges should consider the broader impact of their decisions on city operations and leadership. Mayor, when you park in handicapped spaces, should I consider the broader impact on city operations? Judge, when I park strategically to conduct urgent city business, you should consider the positive impact that business has on job creation, tax revenue, and economic development. Strategic parking. He'd reframed violating disability access laws as strategic civic leadership. Mayor DeStefano, let me help you understand something about how municipal government actually works in America. DeStefano looked at me expectantly, probably thinking I was about to acknowledge his authority over my court. Mayors run the executive branch of city government. They oversee departments, implement policies, and execute the laws that city councils pass. I paused to let that sink in. Judges interpret and apply the law equally to all citizens, regardless of their position in city government. We don't work for mayors. We work for the Constitution, the law, and ultimately for the people who expect equal justice. DeStefano's expression was becoming increasingly hostile. Judge, that's a nice civics lesson, but the practical reality is that municipal courts are funded by city budgets, staffed through city personnel systems, and housed in city-owned buildings. Mayor, those are administrative realities, not judicial ones. My courtroom isn't your conference room. Judge Caprio, I think you're being unnecessarily adversarial here. I'm simply asking for reasonable consideration of the circumstances involved in these citations. Mayor, you're asking me to give you special treatment because you believe I work for you. I'm asking you to use practical judgment about situations involving legitimate city business. Mayor, there's nothing legitimate about violating laws that protect disabled citizens' access to businesses. That's when DeStefano's political mask finally slipped completely. Judge, let me be very direct with you. I've been mayor of this city for 8 years. I brought in over $60 million in economic development. I've cut taxes, improved services, and maintained public safety. The voters have elected me twice because they trust my leadership. He was listing his political resume as if it justified his parking violations. Mayor, your accomplishments as mayor don't exempt you from parking laws. Judge, my accomplishments as mayor demonstrate that I make decisions based on what's best for this city, not on rigid adherence to bureaucratic regulations that interfere with important work. Mayor, do you consider disability access laws to be bureaucratic regulations? Judge, I consider any law that interferes with economic development meetings to be a potential obstacle to serving the public interest. DeStefano was openly stating that he considered the laws to be obstacles when they inconvenienced him. Mayor DeStefano, let me ask you directly, do you believe that being mayor gives you the right to violate laws that apply to everyone else? Judge, I believe that being mayor gives me the responsibility to prioritize the greater good over minor technical violations. And who determines what constitutes minor technical violations? Reasonable public officials who understand the difference between meaningful law enforcement and bureaucratic harassment. Bureaucratic harassment. DeStefano was characterizing enforcement of disability rights laws as harassment when applied to mayors. Mayor, I'm going to explain something to you about judicial independence and equal justice under law. DeStefano crossed his arms defensively. You told me that I work for you because municipal court is part of city government. That's fundamentally incorrect. I was elected by the voters to serve as an independent.
So when an ordinary citizen violates them, it's a fine. When a mayor violates them repeatedly? That's not convenience, that's contempt. And there it is. The sentence every judge hopes they never hear, but every democracy must be ready to answer. Because the moment a politician believes judges work for him, the law stops being justice and starts being decoration.
Judicial officer, I take an oath to uphold the Constitution and apply the law equally to all citizens. Judge, you were elected to handle municipal legal matters efficiently and fairly. Mayor, efficiently and fairly means that mayors get the same treatment as everyone else when they violate parking laws. Judge Caprio, I think you're making this much more complicated than it needs to be. Mayor, you're the one who made it complicated when you claimed that I work for you and should give you special treatment because of your political position. I looked at the citation record again. 7 violations over 6 months. 7 times DeStefano had decided that his convenience was more important than disabled citizens' access to businesses. Mayor DeStefano, I find you guilty on all 7 counts of violating municipal parking ordinances. You're fined $300 per violation for a total of $2,100. DeStefano looked shocked. Your Honor, that seems excessive for parking violations. Mayor, it's the standard fine for handicapped parking violations. What's excessive is a mayor who commits 7 violations while claiming he's serving the greater good. Your Honor, I request that this matter be appealed to the Superior Court. Mayor, you have that right, but you'll discover that Superior Court judges also don't work for you. DeStefano's attorney tried to smooth things over. Your Honor, perhaps we could arrange community service in lieu of fines. Counselor, your client can pay the fines like any other citizen who violates parking laws. But I wasn't finished. Mayor DeStefano, you spent this hearing explaining that you believe municipal judges should consider your political position when ruling on your violations. You've claimed that I work for you and should defer to your judgment about what laws apply to mayors. DeStefano said nothing. Mayor, you've demonstrated a fundamental misunderstanding of American democracy. Judges don't work for mayors. Police officers don't work for mayors when they're enforcing laws. The law itself doesn't work for mayors. I looked directly at him. Mayors work for the people who elected them. Judges work for the Constitution and the rule of law. When mayors violate the law, judges hold them accountable, just like any other citizen. Your Honor, I've served this city with integrity and dedication. Mayor, integrity means following the same laws you expect everyone else to follow. Dedication means respecting the rights of all citizens, including disabled citizens who need access to businesses. 2 weeks later, Mayor DeStefano held a press conference to announce that he was appealing my ruling and that he stood by his actions as necessary for effective city leadership. He claimed that his parking decisions were justified by the economic benefits they produce for the city. 3 months later, Superior Court upheld my ruling and added additional fines for filing a frivolous appeal. The appeals court judge noted that DeStefano's claim of judicial bias was entirely without merit, and that his argument for mayoral immunity from parking laws was contrary to basic principles of equal justice. 6 months later, DeStefano faced a recall election initiated by disability rights advocates who were outraged by his attitude toward handicapped parking laws. The recall campaign focused on his statement that judges work for mayors.
This isn't arrogance anymore, it's a direct attack on judicial independence. This is why accountability matters. Not because of fines. Not because of headlines. But because the law only works when it applies to the powerful the same way it applies to everyone else. Ask yourself, if a mayor can ignore disability rights for lunch meetings, who's next? Today it's a parking space. Tomorrow, it's something far worse.
In his claim that economic development justified violating disability access laws. During the recall campaign, DeStefano's opponent was Maria Santos, a city councilwoman who'd spent years advocating for disability rights and government accountability. Santos's campaign slogan was, "Public officials work for the people, not the other way around." DeStefano lost the recall election by 18 points, one of the largest margins in Rhode Island municipal history. Exit polls showed that voters were particularly offended by his claim that judges worked for him and his dismissive attitude toward disability rights. Maria Santos became mayor and immediately implemented new policies requiring all city officials to attend training on disability rights and judicial independence. She also established a citizen oversight committee to review complaints about official misconduct. I received a letter from Santos 6 months after she took office. Judge Caprio, Santos wrote, "Thank you for teaching former Mayor DeStefano that no elected official is above the law. Your ruling reminded our entire city government that we serve the people, not the other way around." When DeStefano claimed that you worked for him, he was really claiming that the law worked for him. Your response showed him that in America, we all work for the law. The DeStefano case taught me something important about political authority versus judicial authority. Politicians make policy decisions and implement programs. Judges apply the law equally to all citizens, regardless of their political position. When DeStefano told me that I worked for him, he believed judicial decisions should serve political convenience rather than legal principles. He thought being mayor gave him supervisory authority over municipal judges. But judicial independence prevents political interference with legal decisions. When judges work for politicians, the law becomes a tool for protecting the powerful rather than protecting everyone's rights equally. DeStefano's parking violations weren't about convenience. They were about respect for citizens whose mobility challenges require close access to businesses. When he repeatedly parked in handicapped spaces while claiming city business justified it. He was arguing that political importance trumps civil rights. The most dangerous moment wasn't when DeStefano parked illegally. It was when he told me that I worked for him and should consider that relationship when making legal decisions. Because once you accept that judges work for politicians rather than for the law, you've destroyed the foundation of equal justice. You created a system where the powerful get special treatment because they control the people supposed to hold them accountable. When I told DeStefano that judges work for the people and the Constitution rather than for mayors, I was defending the principle that makes democracy possible. No one, regardless of their political position, is above the law. Mayor DeStefano learned that lesson the hard way, and every public official who heard about his case learned it by watching what happened to a mayor who thought judges worked for him. I'm Frank Caprio. Remember, sometimes the best judgment is not in the book, it's in your heart. Thanks for listening, and God bless.